The night they called her cursed was the same night the Alpha King's heart stopped beating. Can you imagine being born at the exact moment a ruler dies, marked with symbols no one can read, and blamed for everything that goes wrong after that? That's exactly what happened to Elara, and what you're about to discover will prove that sometimes the greatest curse is actually the most powerful gift waiting to be understood. The blood moon hung in the sky like an open wound. A total lunar eclipse painted the heavens crimson, casting Ashenmore Pack territory in an eerie red glow that made even the bravest wolves retreat to their dens. And in that precise moment, when the moon completed its passage through Earth's shadow, two destinies collided. Alpha King Thaddeus drew his final breath after 70 years of wise leadership, and a baby girl screamed her way into existence with lungs that seemed impossibly powerful for such a tiny creature. The midwife who delivered her gasped and nearly dropped the infant when she saw what marked the child's skin. Silver and gold lines traced intricate patterns across the baby's arms, chest, and back. They looked like ancient writing, like prophecies carved directly into flesh. The symbols glowed faintly beneath the eclipse's crimson light, pulsing in rhythm with the newborn's heartbeat. "Cursed," the midwife whispered, backing away from the child. "This baby is cursed." Elara's mother, weak from childbirth and devastated by the Alpha King's death, reached desperately for her daughter, but the whispers had already begun spreading through Ashenmore like wildfire. The cursed child, born as the Alpha died, marked by dark magic, bearer of misfortune. By the time Elara could understand words, she knew what they called her. By the time she could shift into her wolf form, she understood what she represented to her pack: a pariah, an omen, something to be feared and avoided at all costs. The curse of Ashenmore, a living reminder of the night the moon bled and the old Alpha King died. 23 years later, Elara existed on the edges of Ashenmore territory like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. She lived in a small cabin at the far border, isolated enough that her presence wouldn't disturb others. She worked in the pack's healing gardens before dawn, tending medicinal herbs with skilled hands before anyone else arrived. The head healer grudgingly admitted that Elara possessed an uncanny gift for knowing which plants would thrive and which were dying, but attributed it to the girl's unnatural markings rather than genuine talent. The marks hadn't faded as Elara grew. If anything, they had become more pronounced. Silver and gold lines traced up her arms, across her collarbone, down her spine. They resembled writing in a language no scholar could decipher, ancient symbols that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when viewed from different angles. Elara had learned to hide them under long sleeves and high collars, making herself as invisible as possible. But even covered, the marks sometimes glowed faintly when she experienced strong emotions, betraying her presence like a beacon in darkness. And then there were the visions. They started when she turned 12. Dreams that felt more vivid than waking life. Images of events that hadn't occurred but inevitably would. She dreamed of storms 3 days before they struck. She saw pack members falling ill with enough warning to prepare remedies. She sensed danger approaching the borders before scouts reported intruders. At first, she tried to help, to warn people, but her warnings were met with fear and hostility. The cursed girl seeing death and disaster? Of course she predicts bad things. She probably causes them with her dark magic. So Elara learned to suffer her visions in silence, to prepare quietly for disasters she couldn't prevent, to watch helplessly as futures she'd foreseen unfolded exactly as her dreams had shown. She was 23 years old and had never been touched with kindness by anyone in her pack. Never invited to gatherings or celebrations, never had a friend who eventually pulled away, warned off by parents who feared contamination by association. She was the most isolated person in a pack of hundreds, surrounded by wolves who refused to see her as one of their own.
And then the nightmares began. Not her usual visions. These were different, darker, more urgent. In these dreams, she saw Malachi, Alpha King Malachi, who had taken the throne when his father Thaddeus died, who had ruled Ashenmore for 23 years with the same strength and justice his father had shown. Malachi, who was respected and loved by his people, who had never directly harmed Elara, but had also never defended her from the pack's scorn. In her dreams, Malachi died. She watched it happen a dozen different ways: throat torn by shadows, chest pierced by invisible blades, body crumbling to ash while he screamed. The details changed, but the outcome remained constant. The Alpha King would die on the autumn equinox, exactly 23 years after taking the throne, 1 week from today. Elara woke from these nightmares drenched in sweat, her marks blazing so bright they illuminated her entire cabin. She tried dismissing them as mere dreams, her curse playing tricks on her mind, but she knew better. Her visions were never wrong. Malachi was going to die, and somehow, impossibly, Elara knew she was the only one who could prevent it. Elara had never spoken directly to the Alpha King. In 23 years of living in Ashenmore, she'd seen him from a distance countless times. At pack gatherings she wasn't welcome to join, at ceremonies where she watched from the shadows, at trials where she stood at the very back of the crowd. Malachi embodied everything an alpha should be: tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell just past his shoulders and eyes the color of amber. He moved with natural authority, spoke with commanding presence, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. He was beloved, respected, the kind of leader wolves would follow into death without hesitation. And he had never once acknowledged Elara's existence. Not with cruelty, he'd never participated in the taunts or fear-mongering, but also not with kindness. He simply looked through her, as if the cursed girl at the edges of his pack didn't exist enough to warrant his attention. So walking up to the palace and requesting an audience with the Alpha King felt like stepping off a cliff. Elara stood before the palace gates in her cleanest dress, her red hair braided back to reveal the marks on her neck and face. There was no point hiding them. Everyone knew what she was, and if she was going to save Malachi's life, she needed him to see the very marks that proved she was cursed. The guards at the gate looked at her with undisguised disgust. "Move along," one said. "You have no business here." "I need to speak with the Alpha King. It's urgent." "The Alpha King doesn't receive cursed wolves," the other guard said, his hand moving to his weapon. "Leave before we remove you." "Please, it's about his life. He's in danger." "Threatening the Alpha King?" The first guard drew his sword. "That's treason." "I'm not threatening him. I'm trying to warn him." Elara's marks began glowing with her distress, and both guards stepped back instinctively. "Please, just give him a message. Tell him the cursed one has seen his death. Tell him the autumn equinox will—" "Enough." A woman's voice cut through the confrontation, sharp with authority. Elara turned to see Elder Senna approaching. The pack's spiritual leader and keeper of ancient knowledge. She was impossibly old, her face a map of wrinkles, but her eyes remained sharp and assessing. "Elder Senna," Elara said, bowing her head respectfully, "I didn't mean to cause a disturbance, I know what you need." Senna's voice was thoughtful rather than hostile. "I felt it, the shift in the winds, the weight of prophecy coming due." She studied Elara with unnerving intensity. "Your marks are glowing. Your visions have shown you something." "The Alpha King." Elara's voice dropped to a whisper. "He'll die at the autumn equinox, 1 week from today. I've seen it repeatedly in every dream, always ending the same way." Senna's expression didn't change, but Elara saw the flicker of fear in the old woman's eyes. "Come with me," Senna said. "The Alpha King needs to hear this, whether he wants to or not." The guards tried to protest, but Senna silenced them with a look. She led Elara through the palace gates, through courtyards where pack members stared and whispered, through halls Elara had never imagined she'd walk. Finally, they reached carved wooden doors. Senna pushed them open without knocking. "Malachi," she said, "we need to talk." The room beyond was a study, lined with books and maps. Seated at a large desk reviewing documents with two advisors was the Alpha King himself. Malachi looked up at the interruption, and his amber eyes widened when he saw Elara. It was the first time he'd truly looked at her, and Elara felt the weight of that gaze like a physical force. She saw him take in my red hair, my glowing marks, the careful distance I maintained from everything in the room. Saw recognition flash across his face. He knew who I was. The cursed one, the girl everyone avoided. "Elder Senna," Malachi said carefully, his voice deeper and more resonant than Elara expected. "What is the meaning of this?" "This is Elara. She was born the night your father died, marked by the eclipse, gifted or cursed with the sight. And she has seen your death." The advisors gasped. Malachi went very still. "Explain," he said, his eyes never leaving Elara. "I see things that haven't happened yet. Visions, dreams, glimpses of possible futures. Usually they're small things. Storms, illnesses, minor dangers. But for the past month, I've been dreaming of you, of your death. It happens at the autumn equinox, exactly 1 week from today, exactly 23 years after taking the throne." "How do I die?" Malachi's question was blunt. "I don't know. The method changes in every vision. Sometimes it's physical attack. Sometimes it's like your body just gives out. Sometimes shadows seem to consume you from within." Elara's marks pulsed with agitation. "But the outcome is always the same. You die. And somehow I know this isn't just a personal tragedy. Your death will trigger something larger, something catastrophic for Ashenmore." One of the advisors spoke up, his voice dripping with skepticism. "My lord, this is clearly manipulation. The cursed girl is trying to frighten you, to gain attention or favor through fear-mongering."
"I want nothing from you," Elara said hotly, turning to face the advisor. "I've lived 23 years as a pariah in my own pack. The last thing I want is more attention. But I can't stand by and watch the Alpha King die when I might be able to prevent it." "And how would you prevent it?" Malachi's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "If you don't know how I die, how could you possibly stop it?" "I don't know yet," Elara admitted. "But my marks." She pulled up her sleeve to reveal the glowing symbols on her arm. "Everyone calls them a curse. But Elder Senna, you know the old prophecies. You know what these marks might actually mean." All eyes turned to Senna. The old woman was silent for a long moment before she spoke. "There is an ancient prophecy, one that dates back to the founding of Ashenmore Pack. It speaks of a price that must be paid, a debt owed for power granted. Every alpha of the main bloodline is subject to it. They rule with great strength, but they must pay the price when it comes due." "What price?" Malachi demanded. "Their life. On the anniversary of their ascension, in a year of great significance, the debt is called. The Alpha's power turns against them, consuming them from within, until nothing remains." Horror settled over the room. "My father," Malachi said slowly. "He died exactly 50 years after becoming Alpha? I thought it was just old age." "And his father died 25 years after taking the throne," Senna said, her voice heavy with old sorrow. "Mine died at 50 as well. The pattern has held for centuries, but we dismissed it as coincidence. Alpha wolves live hard lives. Of course they might die at significant intervals. But it's not coincidence," Elara said. "It's the prophecy, the price coming due." "And the marks?" Malachi looked at Elara. "What do they have to do with this?" Senna moved closer to Elara, studying the glowing symbols with intensity that made Elara uncomfortable. These aren't marks of a curse. They're marks of prophecy, ancient protective runes that appear on one born at the exact moment of great change. The eclipse, the death of an alpha, the birth of one who might break the cycle. You're saying she's meant to save me? Malachi's voice was incredulous. I'm saying she might be the only one who can. Senna traced a finger near, but not touching one of the marks on Elara's arm. The prophecy speaks of the debt and the price, but it also speaks of the marked one born in blood-red moonlight, bearing the words of the ancients on his skin, seeing what others cannot see. She alone can stand between the Alpha and his doom. But Elara's voice broke. I'm just the cursed girl. I have no power, no training. How could I possibly save the Alpha King? Because you were made for this, Senna said gently. Everything you've endured, the isolation, the visions, the marks, it was all preparation. You're not cursed, child. You're chosen. The words hit Elara like a physical blow. Chosen, not cursed. Everything she'd suffered, every moment of loneliness and fear and rejection had a purpose. She looked at Malachi and saw him studying her with new eyes, seeing her perhaps for the first time as something other than the unfortunate girl everyone avoided. Can you prove this? He asked Senna. Can you prove the prophecy is real? That this isn't just superstition? I can show you the texts, the old writings preserved from the pack's founding. Senna moved toward the door. But my lord, I don't need texts to prove what I can feel in my bones. The autumn equinox is in 7 days. Something is coming, and whether you believe in prophecies or curses or chosen ones, you can't deny that Elara has seen your death. Would you risk dismissing her warning on pride alone? Malachi was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, his decision made. Elara, he said, and it was the first time he'd spoken her name. You'll stay at the palace. You'll work with Elder Senna to understand these prophecies and these marks, and you'll help me determine if there's any truth to your visions. And if there is, Elara asked quietly, then you'll help me survive, because I'm not ready to die. Not when there's so much left to protect. The palace gave Elara a room in the east wing, small but comfortable, far nicer than her isolated cabin. She felt awkward and out of place among the fine furnishings, but at least she was inside, warm, and for the first time in her life, not actively rejected, though pack members who passed her in the halls still stared and whispered, their fear palpable. Elder Senna wasted no time. That very afternoon, she brought Elara to the palace archives, a vast underground chamber filled with scrolls and books preserved through generations. The founding texts, Senna said, pulling out a leather-bound volume that looked older than Ashenmore itself. She opened the book carefully, and Elara leaned in to see pages covered in flowing script and diagrams that looked eerily similar to the marks on her skin. Our pact wasn't always what it is now. Centuries ago, Ashenmore was weak, barely surviving, constantly threatened by stronger packs. The Alpha at the time, a wolf named Cyrus, made a bargain with an ancient power, a spirit of the forest, or a god, or perhaps just magic so old it had gained consciousness. The texts are unclear. She pointed to a passage. Cyrus asked for strength, for power to protect his pack, and the bargain was granted. Each alpha of his bloodline would be gifted with extraordinary strength, wisdom, and longevity. They would lead Ashenmore to greatness. But at what cost? Elara asked, though she already knew. Their life. When the debt came due on a significant anniversary in a year of celestial importance, the power would turn inward. The very strength that made them great would consume them. Senna turned the page. And here, the prophecy of the marked one. Elara read the ancient words, her marks tingling as if recognizing the text. In the year of blood moon's birth, one shall come bearing ancient worth, marked by words the eye cannot read, seeing threads of future's need. Only she who bears the sign may sever death's determined line. Born as old power passes on, she alone may right the wrong. That's me, Elara whispered. Born during the blood moon eclipse, marked with symbols no one can read, seeing futures before they happen. Yes, Senna's voice was gentle, and Malachi is the Alpha facing his reckoning. 23 years, a significant number. The autumn equinox, a time of balance and power, all the elements align. But how do I save him? The prophecy says I can, but not how. That's what we must discover, quickly. The next 5 days blurred together in desperate research. Elara and Senna combed through every text about the founding bargain. Malachi joined them when he could, and slowly something shifted between him and Elara. He learned he wasn't the distant alpha she'd imagined. He had doubts, fears, carried the weight of leadership with gravity that aged him. He learned she was brilliant, her mind making connections others missed, her visions following patterns that could be interpreted. They worked late into the nights, often alone in the archives after Senna had gone to bed. And in those quiet hours, Elara felt something growing between them, something she'd never expected to feel. Connection, understanding, maybe even the beginnings of something deeper. "Tell me about your life," Malachi said one night when they'd reached a dead end and needed a break. "Before all this, what was it like being the cursed one?" Elara was quiet for a long moment. "Imagine being invisible and too visible at the same time. People looked through me when they could, but when they had to acknowledge me, they acted like I was contaminated, dangerous. Did you have anyone? Friends? Family?" "My mother tried, but the pack's rejection wore her down. She died when I was 15. After that, I was alone. Truly alone." Elara traced the marks on her arm. "But it made me strong, taught me to trust my own judgment. Maybe that's why I can stand here now, trying to convince an alpha king that prophecies are real." "You're remarkable," Malachi said softly. "I wish I'd seen it sooner." "You're seeing it now. That's enough." Their eyes met across the ancient texts, and Elara felt that pull, the awareness of him as more than just the Alpha King, as a man, attractive, intelligent, kind. She looked away quickly, reminding herself this was temporary. Once the prophecy was dealt with, she'd return to the edges where she belonged. But the thought made her heart ache. 2 days before the equinox, they found it, buried in a footnote about ancient rituals. The marked one must stand between the Alpha and his doom at the moment of reckoning, offering her own life in exchange for his. Only blood willingly given can break blood bargains made. "A sacrifice," Senna briefed. "The marked one must offer her life." Cold washed through Elara. "So the only way to save Malachi is for me to die in his place?" "No," Malachi's voice was sharp, definitive. "Absolutely not. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Senna said gently. "This is what the prophecy has always meant." "Then the cycle can remain unbroken." Malachi stood, agitation clear in every line of his body. "I won't allow Elara to sacrifice herself for me." "It's not your choice," Elara said quietly. "This is why I was marked, why I was born at that exact moment. I'm the answer to a bargain made centuries ago." You're a person, not a payment. Malachi's voice rose. You deserve to live, Elara, to have a life, to be more than a sacrifice for a prophecy you didn't choose. None of us choose our destiny, but we can choose how we respond to it. I've spent 23 years believing I was cursed. If my death can have meaning, if it can save lives, how could I not consider it? Because you deserve to live. The words came out almost as a shout. You deserve to have a life, Elara, to be more than this. Malachi moved closer, his amber eyes intense. There has to be another way, some loophole, some alternative. I've studied these texts for 5 days, Senna interrupted. There's no loophole. The language is clear. A life for a life. Blood willingly given. Silence fell, heavy with implications. Finally, Elara spoke. I'll do it. When the time comes, I'll stand between Malachi and whatever comes for him. I'll offer myself in his place. Elara. It's my choice, she said firmly. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing something that matters. Let me have that. The night before the equinox, Elara stood on a palace balcony watching the moon rise. Nearly full, just 1 day shy of perfect roundness. Tomorrow night, it would be complete. Tomorrow night, she would die. Strangely, she felt calm, peaceful. Her whole life had been building to this moment. She wasn't cursed. She was chosen. I thought I might find you here. Malachi stepped onto the balcony. He clearly hadn't been sleeping either. Couldn't sleep? She asked. No. He stood beside her. I keep thinking there must be something we missed. There isn't. Elara's voice was gentle. You have to accept that, Malachi. I refuse to accept that you have to die. Why does it matter so much? You barely knew I existed a week ago. Malachi was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I see you now. Because I've spent this week learning who you are. Your brilliance, your strength, your compassion despite everything this pack has done to you. He turned to face her. Because somewhere in these last 5 days, I stopped seeing you as the cursed one. I started seeing you as the person I want beside me, as someone I could love, if we had more time. Elara felt tears spill down her cheeks. You're making it very difficult for me to be brave about dying. Good. Malachi cupped her face in his hands. Be selfish. Be scared. Fight against this. I can't fight destiny. Watch me. And then Malachi kissed her, desperate and tender and fierce at all once. Elara melted into it, her marks glowing so bright they lit up the entire balcony. When they broke apart, Malachi rested his forehead against hers. I won't let you die, he whispered. I don't care what the prophecy says. There has to be another way. But they both felt the truth. Tomorrow would come. The equinox would arrive. And one way or another, the prophecy would be fulfilled. The autumn equinox dawned clear and cold. Elara dressed carefully, pulled her red hair back, and traced her glowing marks one last time. They were brighter than she'd ever seen them, pulsing with power that seemed to anticipate what was coming. At sunset, the exact moment of the equinox when day and night balanced perfectly, Malachi would go to the sacred grove at the heart of Ashenmore territory, where every Alpha King had taken their oath, where the ancient power was the strongest, and where the prophecy would either be fulfilled or broken. The pack gathered in the grove as the sun began its descent, told only that there was an ancient ritual to perform. Malachi stood at the center, dressed in ceremonial robes, every inch like the Alpha King. But Elara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept finding her in the crowd. As the sun touched the horizon, as the light began to shift from gold to amber to red, something changed in the grove. The air grew heavy, thick with power. The ancient trees seemed to lean inward, watching, and shadows began to gather around Malachi. Not natural shadows. These were alive, writhing, reaching for him with tendrils that looked like clawed hands. The pack gasped and backed away. This was it. The debt coming due. Malachi stood firm, his jaw set even as the shadows wrapped around his legs, his waist, climbing higher. Elara could see them beginning to consume him, black fire feeding on his life force. "Now!" Senna shouted. Elara didn't hesitate. She ran forward, pushing through the wall of shadows, her marks blazing so bright that they temporarily drove the darkness back. She reached Malachi just as the shadows prepared to consume him completely. "Ember, no!" Malachi tried to push her away, but she was already moving. She placed herself between him and the vortex of darkness that had formed at the grove's heart. "I offer myself," Elara said, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "Blood willingly given. Take me in his place." The shadows paused, considering. Then they released Malachi and wrapped around Elara instead. Pain exploded through her body as the darkness invaded, seeking to consume her the way it had been meant to consume Malachi. But something was different. Her marks, the prophecy carved into her skin, began to burn with silver and gold fire. The shadows recoiled, hissing, because Elara wasn't meant to be consumed. She was meant to be the key. The marks on her skin began to glow brighter, the ancient symbols rearranging themselves, and suddenly Elara understood. She'd been reading the prophecy wrong. They all had. Only she who bears the sign may sever death's determined line. Not through dying, through understanding. The marks weren't decoration. They were the original bargain, written in the language of the ancient power. And Elara, born at the exact moment of death and life, marked by the eclipse that represented balance, she was the translator. She was the one who could rewrite the deal. "The bargain was made in desperation," Elara said, speaking not to the pack, but to the ancient power itself. "Cyrus asked for strength to protect his people, and you gave it. But the price, the lives of alphas on significant anniversaries, that wasn't protection. That was cruelty." The shadows swirled, neither attacking nor retreating. Elara continued, her marks blazing. "I propose a new bargain. The strength remains, the protection remains, but the price changes. Not life, but service. Each alpha of Ashenmore must dedicate their rule to protecting not just the pack, but all those who are weak, rejected, outcast. They must see those whom others overlook. They must defend those whom others fear." She gestured to herself. "As I was overlooked, as I was feared, let that be the price. Not death, but compassion. Not sacrifice, but service." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the shadows began to recede, flowing back into the vortex. The darkness compressed, condensed, until it formed almost like something like a figure. And a voice spoke, old beyond old, neither male nor female, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "The marked one has spoken. The balance shifts. The bargain is remade. The figure turned toward Malachi. Alpha King of Ashenmore, do you accept these terms? Will you and all who come after you serve not just the strong, but the forgotten? Malachi didn't hesitate. I accept it. I swear it before the pack, before the ancestors, before whatever power you represent. I will see those who are overlooked. I will protect those who are feared. This is my oath. The figure seemed to nod. Then the debt is satisfied. The cycle is broken. And the marked one has fulfilled her purpose, not through death, but through wisdom. The vortex began to close, the ancient power retreating. The shadows dissipated like smoke in wind, and Elara collapsed. Malachi caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her into his arms. Her marks had stopped glowing, returning to their normal silver and gold, but she was pale and shaking. "Elara!" His voice was tight with fear. "Stay with me." She opened her eyes and managed a weak smile. "I'm alive. I didn't actually expect that."
Relief crashed through him, and he pulled her tighter. "You broke the prophecy. You saved me without dying." "I reread the prophecy," she whispered. "Severing death's line didn't mean taking your place. It meant cutting the thread that tied you to death, rewriting the bargain at its source." Elder Senna approached, tears streaming down her face. The marked one wasn't meant to be a sacrifice. She was meant to be a savior. And you did it, child. You saved not just Malachi, but every alpha who will come after him. The pack was stirring, murmuring, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Elara had stepped between their Alpha King and certain death. The cursed one had saved them all. Malachi helped Elara to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Then he turned to address his pack, his arms still around her waist, in a gesture both protective and possessive. "This is Elara," he said, his voice carrying across the grove. "Not cursed, not an omen, not something to be feared. She is the marked one, chosen by prophecy to save this pack. And she is under my personal protection from this moment forward. Anyone who treats her with anything less than the respect she deserves will answer to me personally." He paused, letting that sink in. "More than that, she is my honored guest, my advisor, and if she will have me, she will be my mate." Gasps rippled through the pack. Elara's eyes went wide. "Malachi," she whispered, "you don't have to." "I want to," he said, turning to face her fully. "I love you, Elara. I've loved you since you walked into my study and demanded I listen to your visions. Since you spent 5 days helping me search for answers when you could have simply let me die. Since you stepped between me and death without hesitation." He took her hands in his. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a week. But when you face death together, time moves differently. And I don't want to waste whatever time we have by being cautious." Elara felt tears streaming down her face. "The pack will never accept." "The pack will accept what I tell them to accept. But more than that, they just watched you save their Alpha King. They watched you rewrite an ancient bargain and break a cycle of death. If they can't see your worth after that, then they're fools." He cupped her face gently. "So I'll ask you in front of everyone. Elara, bearer of the marks, seer of futures, the woman who saved me in every way a person can be saved, will you be my mate?" Elara looked around at the pack. Some still looked uncertain, but others, more than she expected, were nodding, smiling, accepting. And she realized Malachi was right. She'd proved herself not by being perfect or powerful, but by being brave, by choosing compassion over bitterness. "Yes," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "Yes, I'll be your mate." Malachi kissed her then, in front of the entire pack as the last light of the equinox faded and the moon began to rise. And this time when their lips met, Elara felt the true mate bond snap into place, not forced or manipulated, but real and right and perfect. The pack began to howl their approval, the sound rising into the twilight sky, and for the first time in her life, Elara wasn't an outsider. She was home. 6 months later, Elara stood in the healing gardens of Ashenmore Palace, tending herbs that responded so well to her touch. But this time, she wasn't alone. 3 young wolves, children who had been born with differences that made the pack uncomfortable, worked beside her, learning about plants and healing under her patient instruction. It was part of the new policy Malachi had implemented, fulfilling the oath he'd made when the bargain was rewritten. Ashenmore now actively sought out and protected those who were overlooked, those who were different, those who needed advocates. And Elara, as the Alpha King's mate and head of this initiative, had found her calling. Malachi found her there, watching her work with an expression of pride and love that made Elara's heart swell. "You're going to spoil them," he teased, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "They deserve to be seen," Elara leaned back against him. "Besides, you created this program. You inspired it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You showed me what I had been blind to for too long." Elara smiled and turned to kiss him softly. "The prophecy was right. I did sever death's determined line, but I severed my own, too. The line that said I'd always be alone, always be rejected. You changed that." "We changed it," Malachi corrected. "Together." As they stood in the healing gardens, surrounded by children who were finally being seen and valued, Elara thought about the night she was born, the blood moon, the death of an alpha, the marks that appeared on her skin. For 23 years she'd been called cursed, but she'd never been cursed. She was chosen to break a cycle, chosen to save a king, chosen to show a pack that their greatest strength lay not in power alone, but in compassion for the weak, and chosen to find love in the most unexpected place. The marks on her skin no longer glowed except in moments of great emotion, but they were still there, a permanent reminder of the prophecy she'd fulfilled. Not through sacrifice, but through wisdom. Not through death, but through life. And as Malachi pulled her close and the children laughed in the garden around them, Elara knew this was the future she'd been meant to find all along.
She wasn't cursed. She was blessed, and she was finally, completely home. Have you ever been misunderstood? Ever been labeled as something you're not? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you loved this story of prophecy, redemption, and finding where you truly belong, hit that subscribe button and join our pack. New werewolf romance stories drop every week, each one celebrating the courage it takes to be different, to stand up when everyone expects you to hide, and to rewrite the stories others have written about you. Remember, what others call a curse might just be your greatest gift waiting to be understood.